Welcome to the Tintin podcast, where we explore the adventures of Tintin, one story at a time. Whether you're a long-time fan of the books, or you're just discovering the world of the boy reporter, this is the place for you. We'll be taking a deep dive into Hergé's iconic series, unpacking the stories, art, historical context, and everything else that makes Tintin a global phenomenon. Each episode will explore one of Tintin's adventures in detail, with plenty of trivia scattered right through. I'm Varun, and today we're heading to the kingdom of Syldavia, where Tintin uncovers the dangerous plot against the throne and King Ottokar's sceptre. Joining me today are Louisa.
Hi again.
Maya.
Hey everyone.
And Wes.
Hey everybody.
So Wes, just like in the Black Island pod, World War II continues to loom on the horizon. By this book, Ottokar circa 38-39, was it inevitable for real-world events to bleed into the adventures? In fact, would you argue that this book was more inspired from contemporary events than, say, a Blue Lotus was?
I don't think it was necessarily inevitable, but even though he was writing this story for children, he decides to set his story in these heavy contexts always. So it's very political and tied to the contemporary events of the time. He's sort of exploring an alternative history of the Nazis' annexation of Austria throughout here. And it's a pretty heavy setting for the Tintin, the boy reporter, to get into. So I think he handles this one a little bit better than books in the past.
Would you agree with that, Louisa?
Yeah, I think this book is definitely borrowing from the political climate of the time because it is 1939, as you said. And it's also mirroring some real world countries without actually exposing anybody in reality. As you noted, there's a portmanteau in there of two certain fascist dictators. So you can tell that he's gleaning some things from what's happening around him in a really clever way.
So where does that put Hergé, Maya?
I kind of think it is quite courageous for him at this point because most of the people at this point were not really calling things out. He has done it in a subtle manner in this story, warning people against Nazi Germany in a background where Belgium is under threat. So for me, I think he has taken quite a bit of a courageous political stance.
Speaking of that portmanteau, Wes, considering that Musler was never seen in this book, it's fair to say that there wasn't a single central villain like Rastropopoulos or Mueller in previous adventures. Yet, does this book hold its own without such a character?
I think it does. I think as good as some of his other villains are, I don't actually believe that singular one-off villains have ever been Hergé's specialty. I think he thrives in weaving whole stories. And so in this adventure, there's a feeling throughout it that something is amiss and you're kind of behind and you don't know the whole story and you're playing catch up. And so I think it completely works in here that there's not, that you don't encounter the big villain that is mentioned and that you're only encountering people like henchmen that are working on behalf of that conspiracy. I think it makes the adventure feel more grounded.
Louisa, we know that this tale takes place in Syldavia, and on the plane ride there, we happen across a 3-page brochure on pages 19 through 21 on the country. Do you like that brochure?
Yeah, this is actually my favorite part as well, and it really it makes all the difference for me. It's incredible. It's better than today's brochures. You don't pick up a brochure that's that detailed anymore. It's more like a page out of a textbook. And it definitely completely enriches this universe beyond the prior issues. And as a kid, it blurred the lines for me too. Like I was convinced it was a real place because you see like not only this such rich history, he's like obviously showing off his world building, but also he includes like a manuscript from the 1400s and like that extraordinary battle scene art, which is definitely a step beyond what we've seen in the comic before. It's like he's really showing off. It's so good.
It also adds a layer of satire and fun, like the national motto. It's an invented language, which is a mishmash of different European languages and the cultural details. It really, really makes it fun as well.
Isn't it weird? I just have to say, while I'm remembering it, that the only article that we've read thus far is written by some other journalists. Like, that's the best example of an article or a publication that we have in Tintin, and it's not even Tintin.
Well, Tintin hasn't written an article in 8 years, but we shall live in hope. I'll throw the Syldavia ball at Wes. Would you agree that Syldavia was a better sculpted fictional location than, say, a San Theodoros or Novorico was in The Broken Year?
I would. I completely agree with Louisa. As a kid, I was probably pretty sure that these were real places that I was reading about. Hey, it had a brochure in there, like, must be real. So this definitely stuck with me more than the fictional place in The Broken Year.
Also fictional was the character that became Tintin's companion in the story, Professor Alembic. Louisa, did you figure halfway through that it was in fact his twin?
Oh my gosh, yes, I think so. In that Hergé is just so adept at seeding the truth throughout the plot. So we get to see bits of what's happening. First, we just see it through Tintin's reaction. So, I was a smart enough kid that you can kind of figure out like why Tintin is emoting, but you pick up on it, and then more explicitly he'll tell you like through his musings and stuff. And this careful way that he threads facts through the plot is part of what I think engaged me to later on in life. I got a degree in criminal investigation because of Tintin really just lighting that fire of like, ooh, like what is actually happening. So yeah, I think just because I was particularly interested in it, that as a kid I figured it out.
How about you, Wes?
I definitely had a suspicion. There's that one point where he says something, and it made me think, okay, there's probably a twin situation going on. But reading through it, it was still super exciting, and I love how Hergé, similar to the brochure earlier on, he uses that photograph of the two of them together as like a source, and it's a great descriptor.
And Maya, do you think Alembic was another attempt at a calculus-style character, a la Professor Sarcophagus from Cigars of the Pharaoh, the pod you were last on? In other words, did Hergé realize the potential of such a character needing to be a permanent fixture in the series?
So Hergé seems to be toying with this idea of an absent-minded scientist, I think, a lot. Alembic and Sarcophagus both show that he has been experimenting with this intellectual, absent-minded character who could serve as a foil. But Alembic is not a true comedic eccentric, I would say. His main role is to be a red herring in this plot, in fact. And unlike Sarcophagus or Calculus, he's not really quirky as well. So it's an attempt there, but he's much more involved in the story.
You were in the cigar sport too, Louisa. Thoughts?
No, I agree completely with what Maya was saying. But I think that Alembic is just one of those few character niches that Hergé is very selective about. He likes a certain type of like archetype, certain character to represent or have different idiosyncrasies, and Sarcophagus, Calculus, and Alembic are part of that niche character. I feel like he selects like one or two different flavors for each story, and Alembic is one of those flavors that he particularly likes. And I think later on it sort of evolves into being Calculus more often than not. But yeah, Alembic is an early prototype of Calculus, I think.
And Wes, while we didn't catch you on that board, I'm sure you'd agree that King Ottokar's Sceptre has an ambience similar to Cigars of the Pharaoh. Are there any later adventures where this vibe is recaptured?
Yeah, I actually think the Seven Crystal Balls and Prisoners of the Sun duo have a similar paranoid adventure momentum to it, to both of them. And actually, so when Steven Spielberg made the sort of controversial Tintin movie a bunch of years back, there were rumors that Peter Jackson and Guillermo del Toro were going to make their own Tintin movies to sort of fill out a trilogy of movies. And I was just thrilled when it was rumored, I think, that del Toro was going to do the Seven Crystal Balls, Prisoners of the Sun one. Wow, I would love to see that movie. I doubt it will ever be made, but I would be so excited.
And Maya, I can see that you've jotted down another adventure in your notes.
Yes. So if you look at Calculus Pairs, it's much closer in tone to this book. It revives the same political espionage thriller style, the atmosphere of government surveillance, paranoia, and the same Syldavian and Bordurian rivalry. So it feels almost like a sequel sometimes to me.
There's also a bit of human world building in this book. Bianca Castafiore sees her first appearance. Louisa, do you think Hergé intended her to be a one-off, or was there sufficient grounding to expect her to return in later adventures?
I'm fascinated by her as a character, and to answer your question, I think that she's introduced as a convenient plot changer. But he realized, that she has kind of an inimitable power to repel Tintin. It's sort of instantaneously and at great speed for, as needed, but she also has this power of international celebrity, so he needs her. But the fact that she is the only female figure that's a recurring character and has a name and has power, and yet she absolutely is repulsive on some level to Tintin, has made people in other books speculate, that that's a sign of his homosexuality, either Hergé or Tintin. And I don't know if I agree with that, but I am a little bit fascinated with her being like just dramatically unpleasant on some levels. But yeah, I think she was maybe just like thrown in there and then becomes quite useful for the plot.
Well, I was reading, supposedly he modeled Bianca after his grandmother, which kind of throws me. And also to throw a bit of fun at opera, which he did not understand and found very boring. And so all of that comes together to, like Louisa was saying, just make a unforgettable character.
Back to you, Louisa. Also unforgettable are the costumes and artwork in this story, and I'm sure you'd agree.
Oh yeah, I judge Hergé's progression in his art by his animals and his backgrounds. And obviously the palatial scenes are exquisitely rendered, and you almost like marvel at his talent and his ability to just pour himself into like every iota of it, down to the pelican theme and everything. But me, I like to look at the horses, because I think this is the one he starts to really get the horses right in America, but this is where they start to be like actually beautiful, and you're seeing that he's drawing from life. He must be with some of them, but that's just because I have horse art everywhere I look at horses. And it just sort of is like an example of his progression. And I don't know why, I'm just like proud of him. I think when you look at the ghastly looking quadrupeds in Congo and Soviet, and then you look at this, you're like, oh, he's really becoming a fine artist.
Wes, how do you enjoy the art?
Loved it. The palace scenes are so cool. The costumes are so ornate. The throne room is absolutely stunning. I was looking at some comparisons between the black and white version and the color version, and the color version is just miles ahead. Incredible. Like the background with the mural in that throne room is very, very pretty. And then the entire throne room with the case in the middle is such a cool setting. I actually visited Scotland a couple of years ago, and I went to see in Edinburgh Castle like the old crown jewels that are held there. And I remember sort of thinking going into it like, oh, I remember that scene in Tintin in my head, and being like, okay, well, for some reason, like, this is what it's going to be like. And it was not like that at all. It was not some big airy lighted room with like big windows. It was just basically a hallway, and it was still cool. But that setting was sort of what I was expecting. And yeah.
Syldavia transformed from what is a feudal setup in this book to a nation with a nuclear and space program when it reappears in Destination Moon. Are we to suspend disbelief for that one, or was that the pace of things in the 20th century?
It does seem in this book, Syldavia does seem particularly separated from the modern world in this adventure. So maybe like 10, 20 years prior. It still has like hay carts getting driven around everywhere, and the monarchy feels kind of old-fashioned. So that pace of modernization was pretty quick in this era, as far as I hear. But I don't think that is necessarily super believable. I think it probably spoke to how it felt to live through that time, though.
Louisa?
Yeah, that is exactly kind of my thinking, because I would think if I created an entire nation state and I even like invested myself in a history and all that, with great impact upon a serial protagonist, that I would feature it again. And I happen to love the fact that he like pushed it to the front of the space program. Like they are the pioneers. And I agree with you also about the pace. Like if you consider just the few decades time between the Wright brothers' first flight and the actual moon landing, it's kind of like, you might as well have these hay cart riding folks in Eastern Europe be the first ones to go to the moon. Why not?
And Borduria was flexible in another way for Hergé. From being a pro-fascist state in this adventure, complete with SS-like uniforms and German-looking aircraft, it reappears in the calculus affair being a pro-communist state with the mustached dictator atop its ivory tower. Coincidence?
No, not a coincidence at all. He was in the throes of World War II and right before then, and then after that arose the Cold War, and so he was just reflecting that new backdrop in his adventures.
Before we march on to the questions, King Ottokar's scepter represents the end of an era for Tintin, as Captain Haddock is introduced in the very next book. Maya and Louisa, how would you rank the three post-Blue Lotus adventures, the Broken Ear, the Black Island, and King Ottokar's scepter?
For me, at the top would be Black Island, then King Ottokar's Sceptre, then Broken Ear. I would go in that order.
I would say Broken Ear, and then Black Island, and then King Ottokar's Scepter are tied, because they're both so good. I really like them. I think Ottokar's Scepter might be the best just because of the brochure that Maya likes too. I really think that brochure really puts it over the edge.
Fan questions are never far away in the sport. Here's the first one of them for US. Did Hergé take solo Tintin, by that we include Snowy, as far as he could in these 8 books? Was a character like Captain Haddock inevitable from this point on?
I don't think he was inevitable. I think Tintin would have done fine continuing solo, but I think it adds so much to have Captain Haddock in there. It adds like a chaos energy. It adds some pizzazz. He's just kind of weird. So I think Tintin is doing fine, but the addition of Haddock elevates it to another level.
Maya, we might have given one of them away earlier, but on a fresh canvas, are Syldavia and Borduria replacement of existing countries, or are they all new countries?
I think they're based on different countries. So, for example, Syldavia, earlier I thought it was Austria, because if you notice, the Nazis are trying to infiltrate, and that's something similar happened with Austria before the annexation. But later on, I found out it's actually based on Montenegro, and it could also be one of the Eastern European countries, so I'm not sure. But it's based on some real country. Borduria is obviously Nazi Germany, so yeah, at least in this book.
I thought maybe just the names alone were like taken from Slovenia and Bulgaria, but obviously politically it's more of an amalgamation that Maya just described.
And Louisa, the entire monarchy collapses if one stick goes missing. Does this feel like a solid constitutional rule to you, or should Syldavia maybe rethink its laws?
That is exactly my running thought as a child. I was so frustrated. Why would anyone want that as their law? But then again, name a more brilliant setup for an adventure. And kudos for Hergé for being the one to seize that concept and take it, as he takes it in the most exciting directions. And I'm going to point out that basically every panel in this there's not a single wasted panel. Everything is so funny. The situational irony of the window, just everything. The made up language, the intrigue. It's so good. Can we all agree that the hero of this story is Snowy? He's frequently a hero, but who brought the scepter to the king?
Snowy.
So wasn't Snowy briefly he could have been the king?
Snowy just was having a great day in this adventure. Not only the day Louisa mentioned, but then later when he goes and he wanders into a building and finds the largest dinosaur bone of his entire life and is thrilled and is running down the street with it. And then gets scolded and has to return it and it's stolen. Yeah, I love that part.
And I'm sure our listeners will agree that it's about time Louisa rated a Tintin book for us. Go ahead.
I'm going to be controversial here, and I'm going to give it the first 7 out of 7. I think this is probably the best Tintin example we've done so far, at least the one I've been on.
And that's a wrap on our journey through King Ottokar's Sceptre. This adventure saw Tintin dive headfirst into royal intrigue, uncover a dangerous coup, and race against time to save Syldavia from invasion. Next up, get ready to go vav vroom because we are shifting gears and are lining up a special on the cars of Tintin. Thanks for tuning in, and don't forget to like, share, and subscribe as we continue our journey with the Tintin podcast.